The obsidian council chamber of the Xylos hegemony was a cavern carved from solidified stellar remnants, its vaulted ceiling arcing into an impenetrable void where captured nebula light struggled to penetrate the layered ferroglass plating. Below, the polished basalt floor reflected the cold, analytical light emitted by the floating glyph discs, each representing a sector governor or a member of the Elder Synodic. Silence in this chamber was not the absence of sound, but a carefully modulated pressure, a physical weight composed of millennia of cautious governance and the sheer inertia of immense political power. Today, the pressure was suffocating, thick with the metallic tang of fear that even the crystalline epidermis of the senior hegemon, Cathar, could not entirely mask. Cathar stood at the apex of the tiered structure, his multifaceted eyes, usually shimmering with the detached wisdom of cosmic perspective, now focused intently on a single, flickering projection hovering above the central dais. This projection depicted the recent arrival of the Terran vessel, a crude, angular artifact of propulsion technology that nonetheless navigated the edge of hegemony space with insolent precision. Its intent remains opaque, hissed Advisor Vilos, whose auditory filaments twitched agitatedly beneath his cranial crest. Vilos represented the expansionist faction, those who saw the unknown as territory ripe for absorption, or perhaps swift neutralization. Its technology is primitive, rudimentary kinetic drives coupled with inefficient subspace manipulation. Yet it bypassed the Kyler perimeter scans as if they were mere atmospheric eddies. This suggests a deliberate concealment, a practiced deception wholly incompatible with a species capable of only rudimentary warp mechanics. The cynicism in Vilos's vocal modulation was palpable, resonating harshly against the chamber's acoustics. The inherent assumption, ingrained over countless cycles of hegemony ascendancy, was that anything not understood must be primitive, and anything primitive posing a threat must be weak. Cathar rotated slowly, his massive, chitinous frame catching the pale light, emphasizing the ancient scars earned during the Unification Wars centuries prior. Opacity is not incompetence, Vilos. It is a chosen state. We have observed the entirety of their charted transmissions. Their cultural output is chaotic, violent, and saturated with irrational emotional constructs they term art and belief. They seem utterly incapable of the sustained, unified logical progression required for true interstellar civilization. Yet, this single vessel has presented itself at the very threshold of our diplomatic quarantine zone, requesting audience with the Prime Conclave. He paused, allowing the sheer audacity of the request to settle upon the assembled delegates. Why would a species so evidently fractured and juvenile demand parity? A low, resonant hum emanated from the lower tiers, the domain of the technocratic guilds. Elder Cygnus, the guild master, leaned forward, his voice synthesized into a precise, emotionless baritone that usually carried the weight of irrefutable data. The energy signature of the human vessel is anomalous. It pulses with regulated thermal exhaust consistent with conventional fusion, yet its shielding appears to be derived from a managed gravitational distortion field, a technique we have only theoretically mapped within the context of stabilized black hole manipulation. They are utilizing concepts we consider prohibitively dangerous, approaching them with a casualness that suggests inherent understanding, not accidental discovery. This dissonance is the true danger, hegemon. They present as infants wielding plasma cutters. The debate escalated, circling the central enigma of humanity. The Xylos hegemony, masters of ordered existence, predicated their galactic supremacy on the quantifiable, the predictable, the logically derived path to stability. Humanity, as catalogued through centuries of distant, passive observation, represented the antithesis, thermodynamic chaos wrapped in biological inefficiency. They fought amongst themselves ceaselessly, devoted vast resources to concepts that yielded no material benefit, and possessed a lifespan measured in mere blinks of Xylos consciousness. To grant them, an audience was an acknowledgement of potential equivalence, a concept that chafed against the hegemony's foundational tenets. Cannot allow this uncertainty to propagate, argued Representative Thalassa of the Inner Systems Judiciary, her voice laced with the icy authority of established law. If they possess technology that breaches our defensive envelope undetected, we must assess the vulnerability. If they are weak, they are a resource. If they are strong, they are a contamination requiring excision. Diplomatic overtures are a waste of calibrated time. Send the deterrent wing, a demonstration of localized power sufficient return them to the void from whence they came. Cathar's internal processors churned, filtering Thalassa's raw, predatory logic against the unsettling data provided by the astrogation core. The human vessel had made no aggressive moves. It held station with perfect, almost unnatural stillness, radiating a complex, rhythmic broadcast pattern that defied immediate decryption, but certainly lacked the usual markers of hostile intent. No targeting telemetry, no jamming signatures, merely structured information pulses. The deterrent wing requires 3 standard rotations to achieve optimal deployment vectors, Cathar stated, his tone heavy with the weight of consequence. During those rotations, this Terran vessel remains unmolested within viewing distance of Sector 7 installations. If they possess true, hidden capabilities, they could leverage that time. We risk a preemptive strike against an unknown countermeasure. We are a civilization founded on calculated risk mitigation, not blind aggression driven by insecurity. He looked towards the silent, darkened alcove reserved for the most ancient, secretive branch of the Council, the Arbiters of First Contact, who rarely interfered unless existential paradoxes arose. A single, almost imperceptible wave of warmth, a rare emission from the Arbiter's enclave, washed over the chamber. A voice, ancient and dry as cosmic dust, manifested directly within the minds of the assembled delegates, bypassing the auditory filaments and the universal translators. It was the voice of Arbiter Lyra. Hegemon. The data fragments we have permitted them to broadcast, the rudimentary historical narratives, the philosophical treatises they call literature, suggest a species driven by narrative imperatives. They do not conquer through pure force projection alone. They conquer through the imposition of their own definitions of reality. If we destroy them preemptively, we destroy the only possible counter-narrative to our own stasis. Lyra's intervention was decisive. The expansionists quieted, unnerved by the sheer depth of the Arbiter's engagement. To challenge an Arbiter was to challenge the structural integrity of the hegemony itself. "We will receive them," Cathar decreed, the decision echoing in the cavernous space. "We will extend the quarantine perimeter to include their position. We will offer minimal technological exchange necessary to facilitate their arrival onto a controlled docking matrix. Vilos, Thalassa, Cygnus, you will form the core reception committee. Let us see what shadow these small beings intend to cast upon our ordered cosmos." The weight of the impending encounter settled upon them. The first direct contact with a species outside the recognized Galactic Federation, one that seemed to operate on principles utterly alien to the structured logic of the hegemony. The vastness of the chamber seemed to shrink around the single, small intrusion from the unknown deep. The journey to the designated rendezvous point was conducted in utter, suffocating silence aboard the Arbiter's scale, a diplomatic transport cruiser whose purpose was less to impress and more to overwhelm through sheer, inert scale. Cathar, Vilos, and Thalassa maintained rigid postures within the central reception aperture, shielded by layers of inertial dampeners and observation matrices. The environment was calibrated to Xylo's comfort: low-frequency resonance fields, regulated humidity, and pale, blue-spectrum light designed to promote analytical calm. The approach of the human vessel, designated Odyssey, was unnerving. It did not glide or surge, it simply arrived. One moment, the space was empty save for the calculated warp ripples surrounding the hegemony cruiser. The next, the Odyssey hung there, small, dark, and aggressively unadorned against the backdrop of manufactured stars within the cruiser's observation port. It was a shard of dull metal, clearly assembled from countless independent components, lacking the seamless, organic unity typical of advanced starcraft. "Sensor readings stabilize," reported a detached analytical drone projected near the hegemon. "No active weapon signatures detected. Passive energy output is minimal, consistent with life support and minimal maneuvering thrusters. Their drive signature is fluctuating slightly, a sign of inherent instability in the power matrix, perhaps." Vilos seized the interpretation instantly. "Instability," he repeated, a note of smug vindication entering his tone. "They are holding position through sheer kinetic inertia, not sophisticated field manipulation. They lack the finesse to maintain perfect equilibrium within our controlled space. They are clumsy." Thalassa focused on the vessel's hull composition data. The outer shell exhibits numerous microfractures and uneven deposition layers. Primitive metallurgy reinforced by localized energy shielding. It is a patched-together vessel, hegemon. A frontier scout, perhaps, or a runaway faction. not a representative of a unified interstellar power. Cathar remained silent, watching the visual feed. He focused on the vessel's primary access hatch. It was thick, heavy, and actuated by visible mechanical stress points, a design philosophy rooted in crude durability rather than elegant efficiency. Then the hatch moved, not with the smooth dilation of pressurized membranes, but with a violent, shuddering grind of metal against metal. A plume of superheated vapor, instantly frozen by the vacuum of the docking field, escaped the momentary breach. Crude ingress, Vilos observed, satisfied. They do not even possess pressurized docking technology, requiring them to expend stored atmosphere to equalize pressure gradients. The figures that emerged from the breach were utterly confounding. They were bipedal, bilaterally symmetrical, and covered in an obscuring, multi-layered composite material that seemed unnecessarily bulky. Their environmental suits. The suits were not sleek and form-fitting like Xylo's pressure shells. They were segmented, articulated with visible fasteners, suggesting an adherence to individual component replacement rather than integrated systemic regeneration. There were precisely 3 of them. They moved with an uneven, almost jerky gait across the docking field, their movements lacking the smooth, energy-conserving grace inherent to any species that understood the physics of continuous motion. They paused at the threshold of the hegemony airlock, which dilated with smooth, silent authority, bathing the figures in pale blue light. The figures halted again, standing motionless for a long moment that stretched the tension in the hegemon's core to near breaking point. Were they recalibrating their sensory input? Were they running complex threat analyses? Then one of the figures raised an appendage, clad in a thick glove, and executed a series of complex, precise hand gestures, not against the airlock controls, but seemingly in the open space before them, directed toward the hegemony sensor network. "They are transmitting," Cygnus reported, his synthetic voice betraying a flicker of confusion. "Not an encoding burst, not a frequency sweep. It is a visual language projected via focused light particles directly into the visual spectrum receivers. They are attempting basic symbolic communication before engaging the Universal Translator Protocol." Cathar signaled the translation matrix to engage, prioritizing linguistic analysis over immediate response. The visual patterns resolved into abstract concepts, circles, vectors, representations of planetary bodies, and finally, crude, recognizable silhouettes of the 3 incoming figures juxtaposed against a larger, abstract representation of the hegemony fleet array visible kilometers away. "They are demonstrating self-identification and situational awareness," Cathar murmured, watching the sequence. "They are acknowledging our superior positioning and power, yet they are not displaying subordination." The translation matrix stabilized, and a voice, thin, pitched higher than the Xylo's range, resonant with an unexpected underlying calm, filled the reception chamber via the universal speakers. It was the voice of the lead human, the one who had performed the gestures. "To the governing authority of this sector, we are the diplomatic delegation from Sol System, representing the unified species designated humanity. We offer formalized greeting and peaceful engagement. We understand that the nature of our arrival may cause perturbation within your established protocols. We request audience for the purpose of establishing mutual understanding and defining parameters for coexistence within this shared galactic volume." The language was formal, precise, and utterly devoid of the typical supplicating cadence expected from a nascent civilization. It was the dialogue of equals, or perhaps of entities who fundamentally refused to acknowledge unequal status. Vilos bristled, his crystalline scales darkening visibly. "Peaceful engagement. They arrive uninvited, violating 3 separate quarantine edicts, and speak of coexistence as if they possess the standing to negotiate it. Hegemon, command the translators to relay a directive. Surrender all navigational data and power cores for immediate diagnostic inspection. This is the only acceptable preliminary step." Cathar held up a restraining appendage. "Wait. Their communication structure implies a high degree of internal political cohesion, contradictory to our prior data. Cygnus analyzed their physiological readings, particularly the neural activity during that transmission." Cygnus complied, his usual placidity momentarily shattered by the incoming torrent of biological data. "Fascinating. Their internal temperature regulation is highly variable, indicative of significant emotional response pathways. However, during the transmission, their neural patterns exhibit a severe suppression of generalized autonomy." Ike response, they are intentionally dampening their own internal agitation to achieve this level of clarity. They are achieving controlled, focused calm through sheer, deliberate mental exertion. Thalassa scoffed. Controlled calm? They look like poorly sealed environmental hazards navigating a magnetic field. Their movements are erratic, their structure inefficient. They rely on brute force mental discipline to compensate for biological limitations. This is not superior strategy, it is desperate mimicry of superior composure. Cathar ignored the cynicism. He stepped forward, moving toward the barrier separating the hegemony delegation from the three silent, suit-clad figures. Arbiter Lyra's mental presence intensified slightly, a cold, intellectual pressure urging caution. "Translator engage," Cathar commanded, his voice modulated to the lowest, most commanding frequency available. "To the representatives of humanity, your presence is acknowledged. Your claims of unified governance require validation. We demand immediate explanation for the technological dissonance exhibited by your vessel, the crude external morphology juxtaposed against the sophisticated gravitational field manipulation." The lead human, identified by the hegemony's remote scanning as designation, Captain Eva Rostova, turned slightly toward the sound source, though her visor remained opaque. There was a brief delay, not of translation lag, but of deliberate processing. "Hegemon Cathar," Rostova's voice replied, maintaining the precise formality. "We understand your assessment is based on external observation of the Odyssey. Its structure reflects the necessary constraints of the evolutionary path taken by our species to achieve interstellar capability within the resource limitations of our home system. The shell is designed for ruggedness and redundancy across diverse atmospheric entry scenarios, not for aesthetic presentation to an established civilization. The drive system is indeed utilizing localized gravity well management. We did not stumble upon this capability. It was engineered through a direct, iterative understanding of general relativistic mechanics. The core of the Xylos' misunderstanding was laid bare. They interpreted the Odyssey's appearance as a measure of capability. Humanity had built a vessel not for elegance, but for survival across wildly different, chaotic environments. Vilos, seizing the opening to assert dominance, leaned into the microphone array. "Survival in disparate environments is an indicator of instability, not strength. A unified hegemony constructs optimized environments. We do not tolerate unnecessary variance. You speak of engineering, yet your vessel appears cobbled together. Explain the inefficiency. Why build a brute force shell when refined energy shielding suffices?" Rostova shifted her weight, a subtle movement that still appeared awkward to the Xylos' eyes. "Inefficiency is a relative term, Counselor Vilos. Our shielding technology, which you perceive as crude, is designed to operate effectively across a spectrum of electromagnetic interference that your established protocols may not account for. Our propulsion system, while perhaps slower in pure linear acceleration than hegemony drives, allows for tactical insertion into zones of high gravitational stress without requiring the immense energy cost of field negation. We prioritize operational flexibility over pure, theoretical optimization within a controlled envelope." Cygnus interjected, his data input streams running hot. "Flexibility, a term often used to mask a lack of standardized excellence. Captain Rostova, your vessel's energy profile exhibits significant thermal leakage during stabilization maneuvers. Are you stating that you deliberately accept energy loss in exchange for what? Adaptability against threats that do not yet exist within the hegemony's threat assessment matrix." "We accept managed risk," Rostova corrected, her voice unwavering. "We accept that our understanding of the universe is incomplete. The hegemony, by its own structure, appears to favor a closed system of understanding, refining known principles to absolute perfection. Humanity's approach necessitates continuous testing against the unknown. We build redundant layers of defense because we assume there are threats our current models cannot predict. You see the heat loss. We see the successful dispersion of unwanted energy signatures that could otherwise overload a less robust core structure during unexpected subspace shear. This was the cultural divide, presented not as a diplomatic insult, but as a statement of contrasting cosmological philosophy. The Xylos' hegemony sought absolute mastery over the known cosmos. Humanity seemed engineered to prepare for the unknown. Cathar felt a stirring in his deeper cognitive centers, a sensation akin to intellectual vertigo. They were not merely technologically behind. They were operating on a different axiomatic framework of existence. We acknowledge the philosophical variance, Cathar stated, his tone cooling, shifting from suspicion to profound curiosity. However, philosophy does not supersede immediate security concerns. We detect no standardized weapons array on the Odyssey. If you seek parity, you must demonstrate capability equal to or exceeding that which you seek to approach. Show us your defense, Captain Rostova. Show us why we should not treat this as an uninvited incursion by rogue elements. The three humans stood silently for another prolonged moment. The second human raised a hand, pointing directly at the largest visible weapon housing array on the Arbiter's scale, a kinetic dispersal unit capable of rendering a terrestrial moon into plasma dust. Hegemon, the second human said, their voice clipped and authoritative. We have no external weapon systems calibrated to threaten your structure because we did not come to engage in conflict. We came to communicate a shared vulnerability. However, if you require a demonstration of our capacity for defense, we can provide one that minimizes collateral effect on your vessel, while illustrating the fundamental difference in our approaches to systemic integrity. Vilos laughed, a harsh, grating sound amplified by the chamber's speakers. Demonstrate defense with what? A polished stone. The third human stepped forward, their helmet visor briefly cycling through a rapid sequence of colors: red, amber, green. A pattern the hegemony translation matrix flagged as an internal communication protocol. Then, the voice, calm and possessing an almost chilling depth, addressed Cathar directly. Hegemon, the primary defense of any mature civilization is not the capacity for massive destruction, but the capacity for perfect, immediate repair and adaptation. We do not carry siege weaponry, because the energy required to deploy it is better invested in resilience. With that, the third human extended a hand toward the wall of the airlock chamber, a flat, featureless expanse of hegemony alloys. There was no visible emitter, no tool. There was only the stillness of the human hand, palm facing the wall. Then the wall changed. Not exploded, not eroded, but rewritten. A segment of the highly resilient ferroalloy, roughly 1 meter square, liquefied, shimmered with an emerald light utterly foreign to Xylo's spectrums, and then solidified instantaneously into a perfectly rendered, three-dimensional holographic display. The display was not projecting light. It seemed to be composed of energized, solid matter, shifting and flowing with impossible fluidity. The image displayed was a real-time schematic of the Arbiter's scale itself, rendered with such precise detail that the Xylo's engineers, monitoring their own systems from distant bridges, gasped internally at the sheer fidelity. It mapped every structural layer, every power conduit, every internal pressure zone, data that should have been entirely inaccessible to an external probe. This material, the third human continued, their voice resonant with quiet authority, is a molecularly reconfigurable substrate we term smart matrix composites. We are not reading your systems externally, Hegemon. We are interfacing with the fundamental energetic architecture of the materials you employ. We can, with minimal effort, alter the structural integrity of any object we touch, not by overwhelming force, but by subtle, resonant frequency manipulation targeting the atomic bonds. The emerald display shifted, zooming in on a major power relay near the central reactor core, a relay known to be shielded by 8 overlapping layers of hegemony anti-tampering field generators. The smart matrix overlaid the schematic with a delicate, almost invisible golden tracer line running directly through the center of that heavily shielded relay. Your defense against infiltration relies on complexity and layering, the human stated. Our approach relies on understanding the underlying resonant signature of the construct itself. We did not need to break your shield, Hegemon. We simply needed to communicate with the physical constants that allow the shield to exist. A collective wave of stunned silence swept through the Obsidian Council chamber, miles away. Vilos, the expansionist, was utterly silenced, his fear replaced by a dawning horror. Thalassa, the jurist, stared at the projection, realizing that every treaty, every law predicated on the security of hegemony physical space was suddenly rendered moot by this single, calm demonstration. Cathar felt a profound intellectual release, the tension of uncertainty evaporating, replaced by the sharp, terrifying clarity of a truly new variable entering the equation of their existence. This was not technological parity. It was a paradigm shift in material science that rendered centuries of hegemony engineering philosophy obsolete in a single, silent gesture. Who are you? Cathar finally managed to articulate the word. Heavy with new respect, perhaps even awe. Captain Rostova stepped forward, the lead figure of the delegation, and offered the closest gesture to a bow their cumbersome suits would allow. We are the species who learned early that the universe does not adhere to the laws we legislate for ourselves. We call this discipline applied sovereignty. And Hegemon, we did not come here to discuss borders or resources. We came because the noise began. The atmosphere in the Xylo's chamber solidified into an almost painful focus. The noise, another unknown variable, introduced by the very beings who embodied unpredictability. Define the noise, Captain, Cathar urged, bypassing all diplomatic formality. Rostova tilted her helmet, seemingly looking directly into the distant sensors observing the exchange. The noise is a structured, non-random signal originating from beyond the galactic plane you chart. It predates the establishment of your hegemony, Hegemon. It predates the formation of the very stars you rely upon for your energy matrices. We detected it during our own tentative exploration into deep space null zones, zones your civilization seems to have carefully avoided. The third human, the one who manipulated matter, pointed again, this time to the holographic display which instantly shifted from the internal schematic of the Arbiter's scale to a sweeping cosmological map, rendered in stunning, high-resolution detail far surpassing hegemony deep-field telescopes. The map zoomed past familiar nebulae, past the defined edges of their known influence, into a region marked by the Xylo's charts as the unknowable void, an area considered functionally empty due to the catastrophic distortion of spacetime caused by the sheer lack of baryonic matter. That region, Rostova stated, her voice gaining an intensity that suggested the immense burden of their knowledge, is not empty. It is merely shielded by a physics you have not yet encountered. Approximately 3 Terran cycles ago, a signal of immense structured power erupted from that region. It is not a broadcast, it is a resonance. It speaks of organized, systemic awareness operating across vast timescales, and its implications for universal entropy are deeply concerning. Vilos, recovering some of his aggressive posture, saw an opportunity to reassert the hegemony's role. If this signal is indeed existential, why bring it to us? Why not mobilize your own forces, which you claim are capable of rewriting material bonds? The second human stepped forward, providing the cold, logical counterpoint. We mobilized immediately, but our response revealed a flaw in our understanding. The signal's carrier wave interferes with our advanced drive systems, rendering large-scale, rapid deployment impossible across the distances required. Our vessels are optimized for internal systemic resilience, not for sustained transit through that specific quantum distortion. And our drives? Cathar asked, already knowing the answer. Your drives, Rostova confirmed, a faint trace of what might have been regret in her tone, utilize a method of subspace compression that seems uniquely resilient to this specific interference pattern. The hegemony's technology, while seemingly older, generates a form of subspace bubble that, paradoxically, acts as an unintentional shield against the signal's primary vector. Where our sophistication fails due to over-optimization, your older, perhaps cruder engineering endures. The hegemony had spent epochs perfecting efficiency and dismissing anything deemed inefficient as obsolete. Now, that perceived obsolescence was the only thing standing between them, and an unknown, ancient intelligence operating outside the laws they understood. Cygnus's voice crackled with urgency. Hegemon, this narrative is extraordinary. If true, the threat originates from a source that views our localized conflicts, the expansionists versus the judiciary, our internal political inertia, as trivial distractions. We must move to analyze the signal immediately. Cathar turned, looking out at the vast, silent chamber, feeling the weight of the Arbiter's gaze even without direct mental contact. The irony was a sharp, cutting edge. The hegemony, the self-proclaimed zenith of galactic order, was about to be saved by the very chaos it feared and disdained. Captain Rostova, Cathar said, his voice now imbued with the solemnity of command facing an inevitable external reckoning. We accept your premise for the purpose of immediate threat assessment. We will grant your delegation temporary access to the prime analytical nexus. However, the terms of engagement are strict. Any attempt to utilize your material restructuring technology on hegemony infrastructure without explicit authorization will be interpreted as an act of war, and the consequences will be immediate and absolute. Rostova nodded once crisply. Understood, Hegemon. We will adhere to your security parameters while operating. G. Under the shared imperative of survival. We require full data access to the source of the signal and the necessary computational capacity to decode its structure without causing local system degradation. The airlock cycled open completely, revealing a sterile corridor leading into the heart of the hegemony cruiser. The three humans, Rostova, the stoic strategist, the second, the quiet operational specialist, and the third, the material engineer, began their slow, deliberate walk toward the Nexus. They were not conquering, they were entering a partnership born of existential dread, their every clumsy step a testament to a philosophy of survival that valued adaptation over pure systemic elegance. As the hegemon watched them depart, a final thought from Arbiter Lyra echoed in his mind, a chilling summation of the encounter. They did not come to fight us, Cathar. They came to integrate us into their defense mechanism. A species that survives by being perpetually wrong about the future is far more dangerous, and perhaps more valuable, than one that believes itself eternally correct about the present. The journey to the analytical nexus was fraught with the silent scrutiny of thousands of Xylo's personnel, yet the humans moved with a terrifying self-possession. They did not recoil from the alien architecture or the overwhelming scale of the hegemony technology. They cataloged it, integrating it into their ongoing operational awareness. Vilos and Thalassa shadowed them, their faces masks of controlled animosity, seeking any micro-deviation that could be flagged as a security breach. The Nexus itself was the crowning achievement of Xylo's computational science, a vast, zero-gravity sphere where quantum entanglement was harnessed not merely for communication, but for raw, parallel processing across petabytes of historical and astronomical data. The room hummed with barely contained energy, the walls pulsing with structured light representing active computations. The humans requested immediate integration into the central projection sphere. The Xylo's technicians hesitated, but Cathar authorized the override. The three figures entered the Nexus chamber, shedding their bulky outer suits in an abrupt move that revealed something even more startling than their crude armor, their biological forms. They were startlingly fragile. Bipedal, soft-skinned, possessing limited structural support, their physiology seemed laughably ill-equipped for the rigors of space, let alone galactic politics. Yet the exposed skin revealed patterns of intricate, almost luminescent scarring along the major muscle groups, and their eyes, large, liquid, and possessing an unnerving depth of focus, seemed capable of processing spectra far beyond the hegemony norm. The third human, the engineer, approached the central projection node. Instead of connecting physical interfaces, she placed her bare hand directly upon the polished chrome surface of the console housing the primary quantum matrix. The effect was immediate and catastrophic to the Xylo's control systems. The hegemony data stream stuttered, the precise flow of structured light fracturing into uncontrolled bursts of color. Vilos roared, "Containment protocols, they are sabotaging the Nexus core." But the sabotage was precise, surgical. The emerald light, the signature of the smart matrix composite, bled out from her skin, enveloping the console not violently, but musically. The Xylo's system did not crash, it was repatterned. The engineer was not merely interfacing, she was rewriting the fundamental computational language in real time, forcing the hegemony hardware to adopt a new operational framework dictated by her own neurological architecture. Captain Rostova addressed the enraged counselors who watched remotely. "Counselors, our technology is not based on proprietary hardware or closed-source programming. It is based on the universal constants of physics. We do not use our technology, we integrate our consciousness with the underlying reality it manipulates." The engineer, designated Dr. Aris Thorne, is aligning the Nexus processing architecture with the necessary parameters to receive and decode the extragalactic resonance. The display stabilized, but it was no longer Xylo's. It was a shimmering lattice of impossible geometry, operating at processing speeds that dwarfed the Nexus's previous capacity by orders of magnitude. The sheer volume of data being analyzed became instantly apparent. "The noise," Thorne murmured, her voice now slightly altered, resonating with the humming power of the reconfigured Nexus. "It is not a signal of aggression, it is a recording." The holographic projection snapped into focus, displaying not complex waveforms, but an actual visual record, ancient and perfectly preserved, shimmering in the redefined light. It depicted a galaxy, recognizably similar to their own, but teeming with forms of life vastly more diverse and advanced than anything recorded in Xylo's history. These ancient entities, possessing technology that manipulated spacetime with casual ease, were engaged in a monumental effort, constructing vast, geometric shields around entire solar systems, weaving intricate patterns of energy designed to deflect something massive approaching from the cosmic dark. They were preparing, the second human, designated Commander Jerk, explained. They realized that survival in the broader universe requires preparation against threats that are not local. They built defenses against an inevitability. The ancient scene shifted. The shields held for an immeasurable span, buffering their civilization against the external pressure. But then, the visual narrative turned inward. The immense technological collaboration began to fracture. The ancient entities, having achieved unparalleled mastery over their environment, began to doubt the efficacy of their shared endeavor. The hegemony's stasis, Rostova stated quietly, observing the narrative unfold. The ancient precursor civilization, we call them the architects, suffered the same fate. Once the immediate external threat was managed, they began to argue over the definition of that threat and the ethics of maintaining the shield when it required the sacrifice of individual freedoms and resource hoarding. The architects, having solved physics and biology, had turned their formidable intellects upon philosophy and morality with catastrophic results. They had become so certain of their own logical superiority in managing the known universe that they ceased to adapt to the unknown. The holographic scene showed internal conflict, not wars, but devastating intellectual schisms leading to systemic paralysis. Resources meant for shield maintenance were diverted to esoteric philosophical debates. The complexity that had allowed them to survive the initial cosmic threat became the vector for their ultimate failure. They failed, Jerk confirmed grimly, not because of the external pressure, but because they lost the capacity for collaborative urgency when the pressure subsided. They became brittle. They prioritized their internal definitions of righteousness over the objective requirement of defense. The final sequence showed the collapse. The great luminous shields began to flicker and dissolve, not from external attack, but from systemic neglect and internal sabotage born of political deadlock. As the shields vanished, the ancient external force, a colossal wave of gravitational distortion, seemingly non-sentient but overwhelmingly powerful, washed over the entire sector, extinguishing all light, all structure, leaving behind only a uniform, absolute blackness. The holographic narrative ended. The Nexus returned to the shimmering lattice dictated by Thorn's integration, but the atmosphere in the hegemony delegation, Cathar, Vilos, Thalassa, had fundamentally fractured. This, Cathar breathed, absorbing the monumental weight of two civilizations demonstrating that perfect order eventually leads to systemic failure, is why you came. You detected the same resonance. You saw the pattern of decay reflected in the cosmological background radiation. Rostova confirmed, we detected the signal. It is a repeating wave front, indicating that whatever caused the architect's demise is cyclical, operating on intervals far exceeding our species' recorded history. The hegemony's subspace drive technology, by virtue of its different foundational physics, offers the only viable means to rapidly deploy a defense mesh across critical sectors before the wave crests on this side of the galaxy. Vilos, stripped of his arrogance by the sheer scale of the demonstrated existential threat, found his voice again, but it was stripped of aggression, filled instead with a desperate practicality. If we are to deploy such a shield, it requires unified coordination of our entire defense network, decades of synchronized effort we are currently too politically fractured to achieve. The hegemony cannot afford internal debate when faced with cosmic erasure. Thalassa, the jurist, looked at the silent, exposed forms of the humans, realizing that their concept of law was simply an optimized, temporarily stable agreement, not a cosmic absolute. The hegemony is paralyzed by its own success. We have engineered stability to the point of stagnation. Cathar turned to the delegation, his multifaceted eyes now filled with a resolute purpose that transcended mere governance. He was looking not at primitive invaders, but at necessary saviors, unpredictable, clumsy, but fundamentally adaptive. Captain Rostova, Commander Jerk, Dr. Thorn, the hegemony will offer full cooperation. We will redirect all available computational and material resources to integrate your stabilization methods with our subspace network. We will cease all internal political maneuvers immediately. We require your guidance to overcome the inertia of our own perfection. Rust. Va allowed a moment of silence before responding, a silent acknowledgement of the profound concession made by the hegemony. Hegemon, our species has learned that the greatest strength lies not in avoiding chaos, but in navigating it. We do not seek to replace your order with our own. We seek to inject the necessary element of adaptive flexibility into your framework, so that when the wave arrives, we are not merely shielded, but prepared to analyze and counter it dynamically. The alliance was forged not in treaties, but in shared terror and mutual, desperate necessity. The Obsidian Council chamber, moments before a theater of political maneuvering, transformed into a war room focused on a threat so vast it rendered millennia of hegemony dominance utterly insignificant. The subsequent weeks blurred into a single, intense period of cross-species integration. Hegemony engineers, initially deeply suspicious of the material science utilized by Thorn, found themselves grappling with concepts that bent material reality at the quantum level. Xylo's strategists, trained in maximizing known parameters, worked alongside Jerk, who constantly pushed their models to consider variables that had been mathematically discounted as improbable. The greatest challenge was trust. Vilos and Thalassa, unable to fully reconcile their worldviews, maintained a grudging compliance, their loyalty constantly being tested by the sheer speed and fundamental nature of the required technological overhaul. Yet, Cathar acted as the unwavering conduit, his authority bolstered by the clear evidence of the architect's fate. The hegemony was being forced to learn humility on a galactic scale. Thorn's integration proved crucial. She was a living interface, capable of translating the hegemony's complex energy matrices into formats understandable by the human operational logic, and vice versa. She demonstrated that the inherent inefficiency of human technology, the redundancy, the layered protection, was precisely what made them capable of operating the architect's defense protocols which relied on robust, slightly over-engineered subsystems that could tolerate harmonic interference. Finally, the massive, coordinated effort reached a critical threshold. The hegemony's long-range subspace projectors, once intended for rapid deployment of punitive forces, were being recalibrated to generate a vast, overlapping network of localized spatial stabilizers, a defensive shell designed not to repel, but to passively absorb and redirect the gravitational shearing wave. They were ready. The calculated arrival window for the first phase of the cosmic pressure wave was approaching. Cathar stood beside Rostova on the primary command deck, watching the diagnostics flicker across the main viewport. A dizzying tapestry of Xylo's energy fields mingling seamlessly with newly implemented human resonant dampeners. "The integration is complete, Captain," Cathar announced. "The network is stable. We have achieved the required field density across the projected entry vectors. It is the most unified effort the hegemony has undertaken since the Unification Wars." Rostova nodded, her expression unreadable behind the visor. "It is a testament to your species' capacity for decisive action when confronted with genuine consequence, Hegemon. You chose survival over pride." "And you," Cathar countered, "have demonstrated that true advancement lies not in defining boundaries, but in understanding the permeability of reality itself. But I must ask one final question, Captain. The architects failed because they turned on themselves once the external threat was managed. Once this wave passes, what guarantees that the hegemony and humanity will not follow the same path, defined by our inherent cultural divergences?" Rostova turned, and for the first time since her arrival, she activated a localized field within her helmet, causing the opaque visor to momentarily clear, revealing her eyes, deep brown, steady, and profoundly tired. "Hegemon," she said, her voice now carrying the unmediated weight of human experience, stripped of the translation matrix's formality. "That is the human condition. We are defined by our internal conflicts. We are chaotic, yes, often irrational. But our conflicts are also the crucible of our evolution. We fight, and from that conflict, we forge necessary truths. We know that alliances based on shared philosophy fail. Alliances based on shared, objective necessity endure longer, because the alternative is annihilation." She paused, letting the quiet severity of the moment sink in. "We are bound now by the knowledge of what waits beyond your maps. The architects focused inward when the danger passed. We will not. The threat that destroyed them is not the only one. We detected something else within the architect's final, desperate data caches, a signal they could not decode, which they deemed too ambiguous to prioritize over their immediate crisis. This was the twist, deeper than the cyclical wave of annihilation. A second unknown layered atop the first. What did they find? Cathar demanded, his posture rigid with anticipation. A whisper, Ristova replied, the visor sealing itself once more, the calm voice returning. A pattern embedded within the background radiation of the universe itself, far older than the destructive wave. The architects designated it the Labyrinth Echo. They believed it to be a map, but a map to a location they feared entering, a place where the fundamental laws of causality break down entirely. Commander Jerk stepped forward, projecting a simplified schematic onto the deck plating. A dizzying, non-Euclidean representation of interconnected pathways that defied conventional geometry. This echo is overlaid upon the destructive wave, Jerk confirmed. The wave forces us into a defensive posture, requiring the integration of all available energy, the very energy needed to navigate the labyrinth. The architects understood that only a species desperate enough to fight for survival would then possess the integrated power structure necessary to attempt the next step. Thorn, having finished her integration, joined them. We are not just defending against a erasure hegemon. We are being compelled by the very nature of the threat toward a new frontier. The Labyrinth Echo seems to be an invitation, or perhaps a warning, left by a civilization that mastered existence before the architects even emerged. We are being channeled toward a nexus point where the rules of the universe are fundamentally different. Cathar looked from the schematics of the impending doom to the incomprehensible pathways of the Labyrinth Echo. The hegemony had sought order. They had achieved stagnation. Humanity, the agent of chaos, had arrived bearing the tools necessary for survival, and in doing so had pointed them toward a destiny far grander and more terrifying than mere defense. So, Cathar said, a genuine, profound sense of wonder replacing the ancient cynicism in his voice. The cosmic threat forces us into unification, and that unification, in turn, grants us the capacity to seek the ultimate unknown. Ristova nodded slowly. The universe does not reward those who optimize for the present hegemon. It rewards those who remain flexible enough to step into the next stage of reality, regardless of how terrifying the transition may be. We are now inextricably linked, a fusion of ordered longevity and adaptive tenacity. The wave will pass, and when it does, we will not return to political squabbling. We will point the combined might of the hegemony and humanity toward the labyrinth. The moment the first, faint tremor of the external pressure wave registered across the Xylo's sensors, a ripple in the space-time fabric that made the very geometry of the bridge feel momentarily unstable. The new alliance stood ready. The hegemony, humbled, had found its necessary counterweight in the aggressive adaptability of humanity. They looked out at the impending void, no longer with fear of annihilation, but with the sharp, terrifying exhilaration of a shared, colossal purpose stretching into an unmapped future, where the only certainty was the necessity of moving forward together. The silence in the chamber was no longer the pressure of fear, but the profound calm of absolute readiness.